Hello, Ivy here. This week's podcast is entitled The Coronation of a Narcissist. No other European monarchy still has a coronation. Introduction, and this is episode 84. This week's podcast and accompanying article looks at the current king and the next in line of succession, both of whom have displayed strong traits of narcissism, particularly over the last 6 years. As the previous, Queen Elizabeth, became visibly less in control of her physical and mental health due to illness, the traits of Prince Charles and his eldest son, Prince William, have never been more evident. Both of them clearly have fragile egos and want and expect to be loved and revered simply because of their titles, not because of their positive and inviting behaviour. I always used to wonder why the Queen held on to power for so long, even knowing that when she became Queen in her mid-20s, she vowed to be of lifelong service to the nation, and that she would only leave it due to death. Having seen the behaviour and the deeds and activities carried out by the top two in the line of succession in recent years, but never more so since the funeral of the Queen, the narcissistic traits have been on full display. Neither of them have service in mind for the benefit of the UK people, but definitely self-interest and image is everything to both of them. And whatever does not come automatically from everyone around them, as well as the people of the UK, then it is coerced out of them by strong tactics and abuse of power. To give an idea of how bad it has become in the last 6 years, but even more so since the death of the last monarch in September 2022, the jealousy and the game-playing of one-upmanship and vindictiveness between father and eldest son, the latter of whom cannot wait to sit in the hot seat and be loved and revered, or else people will be forced to love them. After all, they were born into the role, and they are to be adored. If we can all see how they are prepared to sacrifice their own, then people of the nation are not even an afterthought if they need to create any hardship for either of the royal bargain basement delusional Batman and Robin duo, the youngest son and younger brother of the bargain basement duo is the most popular royal and has been for many years next to the Queen. Now she has gone, and Prince Harry has been bullied out of the UK by the battery-powered duo, and the life of the Sussex family put at an even higher risk as a result. The world now understands more than ever why Prince Harry had to escape and take his family with him. And the Commonwealth in particular has realised the true views of the British royal family and people of colour, and all doubts as to whether they were imagining this perspective by the royal family, most have come to the conclusion that the days of colonisation are definitely over, and things now need to change big time and move on. What does this mean for the UK? What does it mean for people of colour in the UK? And in the Commonwealth and the world as a whole? What does it mean now, following the Brexit vote in 2016, where much of the rhetoric was negative towards foreigners, particularly those from Europe, and people of colour everywhere. What does it mean for the people of the UK, many of whom are living in increasing poverty, whilst we have a government and a monarchy who seem unable to read the room, and who are in lockstep with other top-tier societal groups to look after each other in terms of their positions of power, and to impose further austerity measures on the population? Many of those working class people fell under the effects of COVID, and many vulnerable people of all ages lost their lives to COVID. There is growing evidence that many of that number were severely impacted by COVID, some of whom lost their lives, as I said, due to the handling of the pandemic by those in power in the country. There is much to unpack here, and the discussion will focus on the personality traits of the monarch and his behaviour towards family members who dared to have independent thought, and the increasing removal of any member of the public showing that they do not support the monarchy. So, this podcast will explore the personality traits of the monarch and the ripple effect on those around him. We will look at leadership and the impact of those with narcissistic personality. We will also look at the evidence that proves most of the managers and leaders who bully people around them have narcissistic traits, and explore the implications of that on people who are in senior, influential positions in a country, and where their actions have a direct, immediate effect on the population of that country. I think it is important to point out from the start of this podcast that I believe that both the monarch and the next in line of succession are solid narcissists, and their behaviour and attitude towards other people, but particularly evident is the approach taken to Harry and Meghan, managing to retain popularity with the people that matter, and have created additional loyal friendships, and their worst crime is that they are comfortably financially stable. From within the first year of independence of having to rely on the UK taxpayer or the next in line if they had remained as senior working royals. Leaving or escaping, however you wish to view it, from all the abuse that was occurring daily and will come out by the royal family's own actions over the coming years, was the best decision and risk that Harry and Meghan took to remove themselves from this worsening toxic environment. Worsening because neither of the Sussexes broke or gave in. Meghan was almost driven to ending it all, because she thought everyone would be happy with her gone. Thankfully, she confided in Harry how dangerous her thought processes had become, and Harry left with his wife and son. The royal family never once contemplated that Harry would leave too, and because narcissists do not react well to not being obeyed, or people ignoring to react in the way the British royal family were used to, i.e. British royal family members always buckling to the pressure in the end and conforming to whatever was required of them. Not least because they had limited skills and survival outside the ring of protection that came from being part of that royal bubble, and all the privileges that came with that. They were prepared to forget about individual aspirations for their respective families and to sit tight and buckle under to whatever was asked of them, because they doubted that they would be able to survive outside of that royal bubble, not least because they would need accommodation and an income stream in order to pay their bills like ordinary people have to do every day, including those who are not affluent. Staying inside the royal bubble enabled them to have no responsibilities and could live a very nice life by accepting whatever was asked of them, whether they hated it or not, or more importantly, would the chosen activity actually make a difference to any recipient of that activity or visit. No one in real life asks themselves that question because they do not care. It has always been about performative activities, and Harry and Meghan, with their philanthropic approach and measurable impact, result-focused projects, were seen as red flags to the establishment. Let's have a look at narcissism and leadership. A direct quote from the Wikipedia on this topic, which seems very appropriate and evidence of behaviours of the current monarch, King Charles III in the UK. Narcissistic leadership is a leadership style in which the leader is only interested in himself or herself. Their priority is themselves, at the expense of their people or group members. This leader exhibits the characteristics of a narcissist: arrogance, dominance, and hostility. It is sufficiently common leadership style that it has acquired its own name. Narcissism is most often described as unhealthy and destructive. It has been described as driven by unyielding arrogance, self-absorption, and a personal, egotistic need for power and admiration. A second quote from one of the reference sources. According to the book Narcissism Behind the Mask, there are 4 basic types of leader, with narcissist most commonly in type 3, although they may be in type 1. Number 1. Authoritarian with task-orientated decision-making. 2. Democratic with task-oriented decision-making. 3. Authoritarian with emotional decision-making. And 4. Democratic with emotional decision-making. It's stated that psychoanalysts don't usually get close enough to narcissistic leaders, especially in the workplace, enough to write about them. End of quote. And my short response to that is, I wonder why. We all know. 5 ways narcissistic people compensate for their inferiority. In this case, we're talking about leaders. The Mayo Clinic Research Group defines narcissistic personality disorder as a mental disorder in which people have inflated sense of their own importance and a deep need for admiration. Those with a narcissistic personality disorder believe that they're superior to others and have little regard for other people's feelings. But behind this mask of ultra-confidence lies a fragile self-esteem vulnerable to the slightest criticism. Narcissism is often interpreted in popular culture as a person who's in love with him or herself. It is more accurate to characterize the pathological narcissist as someone who's in love with an idealized self-image, which they project in order to avoid feeling and being seen as the real, disenfranchised, wounded self. Deep down, most pathological narcissists feel like the ugly duckling, even if they painfully don't want to admit it. So, of those 5 characteristics, number 1, overinflated sense of self. Many narcissists enjoy bragging about themselves in grandiose and exaggerated terms. The self-admiring statements are intended for you to look up and to adulate them. In essence, they want you to worship them so they feel special, exceptional, and important. It is with this superficial and compensatory outer mask that the narcissist constructs his or her false identity, submerging in an insecure, wounded self. Two, reacts poorly to criticism. An easy way to spot a narcissist's fragile ego is to observe the way in which he or she reacts to criticism, even when such comments are offered diplomatically, reasonably, and constructively. Most mature adults are able to take fair criticisms in stride, assess their validity, and use helpful feedback as a valuable learning tool. Chronic narcissists, however, tend to be highly offended by and ultra-sensitive to even minor criticisms, especially those that have merit. For they fear that the truth will expose just how fake and hollow they really are. Narcissistic injury. 3. Jealous of others, possessive of attention. Jealousy can be defined as feeling envious for not having what someone else has. While some people experience jealousy on occasion, many chronic narcissists feel envious and resentful of others' happiness and success on a regular basis, and pathologically make this in order to make themselves feel better. Many pathological narcissists are also attention hogs in their personal and or professional lives. They want you to constantly focus on them and cater to them. Your attention and appeasement, they feel insignificant. Number 4, manipulates to get what they want. There are those whose primary ability is to spin wheels of manipulation. It is their second skin, and without these spinning wheels, they simply do not know how to function. Examples of narcissist manipulation include, and are not limited to, A. Negative manipulation, intended to gain an advantage by causing the victim to feel inferior, inadequate, insecure, and or self-doubt. B. Positive manipulation, intended to bribe the victim emotionally to win favours, concessions, sacrifices, and or commitments. C. Deception and intrigue, intended to distort the perception of the victim for easier exploitation. D. Strategic helplessness, intended to take advantage of the victim's goodwill and guilty conscience. E. Hostility and abuse, intended to dominate and control the victim through overt aggression. The truth about narcissistic manipulation is that deep down, many narcissists don't believe they have what it takes to get what they want in a healthy, reasonable way. To compensate for the inadequacy, they resort to false personas and deceptive machinations to gain a measure of what they desire. 5. Unable to face the real self and unable to see you as a real person. The bottom line of being in a relationship with the pathological narcissist is that your thoughts, emotions, and priorities are constantly invalidated. You exist merely to serve the whims and the pleasures of the narcissist. The flip side of this dynamic is that in creating and facilitating such relationships, the narcissist is refusing to acknowledge the hard truth that he or she is incapable of a genuinely loving and respectful relationship. Many chronic narcissists have very little to give and will painfully never admit to this, for it is better to be the phony fake self than the disenfranchised real self. Next section of the podcast, a very small section, but plenty of reference sources relating to all of these headings for you to look further if you so wish. The 4 Ds of narcissism, and they are deny, dismiss, devalue, and divorce. There's nothing easy about being married to a narcissist. That is why being married to one often leads to divorce. In fact, narcissistic personality disorder and divorce are so commonly paired together. We're going to go ahead and coin a new phrase that outlines how narcissism can do so much damage to marital relationships. That's from a reference source, and I've added here my own words. I am adding family relationships too, not just marriage. The British royal family do not act like families in the way most of us know that dynamic to be. The British royal family appear to treat family members like employees in their business, hence describing themselves as the firm. Remember this analogy when you hear some of the words used and when you hear or read about the actions. I know that you all will be able to draw upon the outcomes of such actions, not least because they appear in the UK tabloid media every day. And in some cases, the individual or individuals appear several times a day in the tabloids because they do not play the game that the British royal family and its media pals want. So, as the media have publicly admitted on several occasions, and receipts exist for every single public outburst, the media have said that Harry and Meghan, and we quote here, deserve all the abuse they receive, end of quote. Because UK media, again opening a quote, have declared war, end of quote, on the couple for daring to walk away. Not least because it has caused a massive reduction in their income stream. And as you will see as we go through this podcast, they're about to lose even more. So let's have a look at these 4 descriptions. Deny. People with NPD often deny pretty much anything that could put them in a negative light. This often comes up in marital arguments when the narcissist goes too far. They say something cruel and uncalled for and then deny that they ever said that thing, even though their spouse heard it loud and clear. Dismiss. If a narcissist can't outright deny something, then they will just dismiss it, which is like the cousin of denial. Did your NPD spouse spend too much money on sports paraphernalia last week? And now you're worried about making that car payment. According to them, you're making a mountain out of a molehill, even if you have financial records showing you're running the risk of going into the red. Devalue. When faced with someone with too much self-confidence, a narcissist gets scared because they secretly don't have any for themselves. In this situation, they will try to devalue their spouse as much as possible. A narcissist will talk down to their spouse to make them doubt themselves and feel less valuable to the relationship. One tactic that they use to do this is to create a new narrative to a situation or argument that allows them to frame it in a way that makes them seem like they are in the right. Divorce. To get away from a spouse with NPD, the only option is often to divorce them. People who want to divorce a narcissist should not feel guilty, no matter how much their narcissist spouse would love it if they felt guilty every moment of their life. Narcissism inflicts emotional abuse, sometimes unintentionally. No one deserves to live with abuse each day. Protect yourself and your family by filing for divorce if it seems like the right way forward. This next section has quite a few reference source links listed at the end of the article. I found it very interesting. Hopefully you will too. So I've just done a small bit of it here, but there are more, as I said, links to it for you to look further if you so wish. Linkages between narcissism and aristocracy, and also the phrase, His Majesty the Baby. It is also part of a research paper, and in the reference sources at the end, there's a separate section on research papers. This area of the podcast is taken from an extract in a very well-known research paper on the subject of aristocracy and its links with narcissism. There are many articles based on the observations of Freud on this topic, and many more articles written about it and paintings done to portray the subject. I am merely taking a few lines from a research paper listed in the reference sources below, but you will find many, many more articles and research on this topic from any search engine. Here is an extract from one such research publication about the 1914 essay on narcissism, Freud's fabulous allusion to His Majesty the Baby, referred to the manner in which doting parents are impelled to ascribe to the child all manner of perfections. Freud deduced the presence of infantile narcissism. However, the historically and politically more interesting meaning of this allusion encourages us to reverse its terms and address His Majesty. In this essay, the focus upon the presence and significance of narcissism acquires political significance to the extent that it is recapitulated within political systems characterized by the concentration of authority within a very limited number of individuals. Just want to add there that particular sentence, which I messed up in the middle, and you'll see in the article and also when you hear this back, it's very important. I think that has a wealth of meaning across a range of topics and sectors. So it's talking about basically the level of power held by a small number of people from certain aristocratic positions. This approach can explain much about the nature of royal authority with regard to the deep-rooted human needs it satisfies. Wealth of meaning in those last couple of sentences. The UK King's no expense spared coronation in a nation that has the highest number of food banks in Europe. Coronations were previously held in the monarchies of Europe. The United Kingdom is the only monarchy in Europe now that still practices that coronation type of ceremony. Current European monarchies have either replaced coronations with simpler ceremonies to mark an accession, for example Denmark, or have never practiced coronations, for example the Netherlands and Belgium. Most monarchies today only require a simple oath to be taken in the presence of the country's legislator. The UK, with its apparent slimmed-down monarchy, is holding a 3-day shindig and a ceremony that even when the Queen had her coronation, the cost of which now, for the coronation that's coming up in May, is more than double, and that's even taking into account inflation from the Queen's original total. You will see in the article the breakdown of figures in a table of the costs from the previous monarch and the one that's coming up in May. King Charles's 3-day celebrations will be, at the current estimate, a total cost of £100 million. As I said, more than double the cost of the Queen's, even when taking into account inflation. Central to the ceremony is the unction, the act of anointing a monarch with holy oil. I was going to say something there, but I will behave and I'll let that pass. This signals the conferment of God's grace upon a ruler. Today, the Anointed Kingdom is the only European monarchy to retain such a ceremony. The last one was for Queen Elizabeth II, which took place on the 2nd of June 1953. Although British coronations have at their heart an Anglican service conducted by the Archbishop of Canterbury at Westminster Abbey, the ceremony combines not only religion but aspects of the UK's uncodified constitution and a degree of theatre. The contemporary form of the coronation dates from 1902, when King Edward was crowned. They consist of a state procession from Buckingham Palace to the Abbey, another procession inside, the recognition, the anointing, the coronation oath, the homage, and finally another procession from the Abbey back to the palace. There are, I think it's 3 or 4 reference sources that list and give you a complete breakdown of what a coronation in the UK consists of, i.e. all of the essential parts that will always be included in the coronation is listed, and why, and who is involved, and why, and how. So if that interests you, it's all there. This next section is the Trussell Trust charity and the formation of food banks in the UK. Cost of living crisis. In May 2022, the Independent Food Aid Network surveyed 101 of its organisations, representing 194 independent food banks across 94 local authorities in England, Scotland and Wales. 93% of organisations reported an increase or significant increase in the need for their services since the start of 2022. 95% of organisations reporting increases said it was due to the cost of living crisis. The Trussell Trust opened its first UK food bank in the year 2000 and operates over half of the food banks in the country. The Independent Food Banks network represents food banks outside the Trussell Trust, and since 2020 has been collecting data from them across the UK. Both the number of food banks and the quantity of emergency food parcels that they distribute have increased over time, with the exception of a partial drop after the COVID-19 pandemic subsided. How many food banks are there in the UK? There are over 1,400 Trussell Trust food banks in the UK, in addition to at least 1,172 independent food banks. The numbers of food parcels distributed by the Trussell Trust increased up to March 22 can be seen in a chart. The chart you will see in the article, and I have done a slide with the chart as well. I'm not going to go through it. There's lots and lots of sections of it, but just so that you know, it'll be in the video and it will also be as part of the article. What a food bank does. And a quote from their website: "We support a nationwide network of food banks, and together we provide emergency food and support to people locked in poverty, and campaign for change to end the need for food banks in the UK. In the UK, more than 14 million people are living in poverty, including 4.5 million children. We support more than 1,200 food bank centres in the UK to provide a minimum of 3 days nutritionally balanced emergency food to people who have been referred in crisis, as well as support to help people resolve the crises that they face. Between April 2019 and March 2020, food banks in our network provided a record 1.9 million food supplies to people in crisis, an 18% increase on the previous year. And during the coronavirus pandemic, food banks have seen needs rise even further. To its shame, or it should be shame, on the country, not the people, the country and the establishment and the processes and systems that are in existence right now, the UK now has heat banks. Heat banks, there are each of the regions have got a heat bank map which will show freezing families nearest places where they can go to warm up this winter. This was written in the last 6 months, so it was referring to last winter, but it's still in place and it will apply for the winter that's coming. Local authorities are planning to use public buildings as warm banks this winter as the cost of living crisis worsens. Millions of people are facing the prospect of being unable to heat their homes over the coming months due to the cost of living crisis. Energy industry regulator Ofgem recently announced that its energy rate price cap would rise to £3,549 a year for a typical household on an average dual fuel tariff. The price cap is set to rise again in January and could hit £7,700 a year by April, according to one forecast. I'll mention here that I can remember a recent news report, I say recent, a couple of months now, where they were interviewing various families that were living in cold properties because they could not afford to turn on their heat, and they were referring to how welcoming and life-saving in many ways these centres around their region where they would go and sit and feel warm. There was heat there. So not only does the UK have food banks, we now have, and I'm grateful that they are there, because without it, I'd really hate to think of how people would survive, because some of them definitely wouldn't, because some of the ages of people that I saw in one of those heat banks, they were definitely, I would say, sort of 70s, 80s. And that, to me, is just immoral, that anyone should, after all their contribution, well, anyone at all, but we're talking about, I focus on children and elderly people who have given so much, and to have to, one, move from the cold house, some of them have mobility issues, but do it to go, or are taken by others, to a place, a public building usually, where they can feel warm and get a hot drink and just the basics that we, people generally anywhere, would take for granted. So I wanted to include that because this is against the backdrop of this 100 million spent on a party over a family that, for me, does very little for the nation. It's very much self-serving. That's a personal opinion, so I won't go any further with that. But I felt it needed to be here. So yeah, the UK now has heat banks alongside food banks. What is a warm bank? A warm bank is a space where people can go to remain warm if they're struggling to heat their homes. Martin Lewis, the founder of Money Saving Expert, is among those to warn that warm banks will be necessary this winter as energy bills soar. They will operate on much the same principle as food banks, in that people who would otherwise struggle to afford heat will have somewhere to get it. However, the prospect of millions of people being reliant on warm banks has itself caused great concern and alarm. Rocketing energy bills have put many people under severe financial strain. A recent study from the University of York estimated that 45 million people in the UK would find themselves in fuel poverty from January, and that's January 2023, so it's already happening. Which buildings will be used as warm banks? As I've said, public buildings, including libraries and art galleries, are likely to be used as warm banks this winter. Councils across the UK are understood to have been working on plans to use public venues as spaces where people can stay warm for free. Birmingham City Council in the Midlands are reportedly also considering using places of worship and community centres as warm banks. A heat bank map is also expected to be launched, enabling local residents to find the warm bank nearest to them. As a council, we will then work with our partners across the city to identify gaps in provision and find solutions to fill them, said one of the councillors, a Cabinet Minister for Social Justice, Community Safety and Equalities on Birmingham City Council. Conclusion. This decline in the wealth of the UK commenced after leaving Europe. Cost of doing business with many sectors based abroad became incredibly costly, as almost half of the nation realised before the vote took place. Be that as it may, the vote took place, and since then a combination of factors have resulted in major areas of the workforce, such as the health service and social care, generally, along with less doctors and nurses joining the profession, as in years gone by. As people retire, the gap in recruiting and training new professionals is widening. Nurses and doctors coming to the UK to work was made extremely difficult by the UK government after the Brexit vote. So ultimately, less professionals even attempted to apply, and those that were here left and were snapped up by other countries, happy to receive people already qualified and who could slot in almost immediately. Many things have increased in price, and the basic services cannot be afforded by even the most vulnerable now. Hence why we have such things in the UK as food and now heat banks. We have a royal family obsessed with punishing the couple who chose to walk away from abuse, rather than look at ways to make the monarchy relevant in this day and age. The British royal family appear to be self-serving, and outside of that parameter vindictive and cruel, simply because his youngest son married a person of colour, and to add salt to injury, outperformed all the rest of the royal family combined, with measurable, impactful work projects, and attracting global recognition for it. All the effort put into the media, slating this couple every single day in their rag sheets, and stoking up hatred and increasing the risks and confirmed increase in actual threats to life of the Sussex family. The British royal family and its media have played games for clickbait income and to keep the so-called invisible contract going, offering up their usual sacrificial lamb since 2016, i.e. the Sussexes, or either of the two adults, although they have been known to be absolutely vile about each of the children in print, which is a new low for them. That being said, they do not see black people as humans anyway. By the way, there are televised receipts on several of those instances. End of brackets. So nothing is off limits for this family, the monarch, and next in line in particular. This give it, snatch it back, let's offer it again, now let's take the offer off the table again. Apart from being juvenile in its conception, someone with intelligence would know that kind of approach can only work when the person you are trying to persuade on something actually wants what you are selling. Once you have nothing to offer that is of interest, you lose your power. As we have already covered in this and previous podcasts, narcissists do not like to be confronted with someone who laughs at their antics. Narcissists do not like feeling that they are not in control. And rattles get thrown out of prams when an intended slight to someone does not land the way one intended. For example, the target is not dependent on any funds from royal coffers, which in reality is UK taxpayers. The target does not add to UK taxpayers' woes by demanding that they pay for their existence. The target does not regard being part of a monarchy, or the firm, as you all seem to call it, as being the peak of success and recognition. Being part of a family would be a desire, but that has never been an offer in centuries of the UK royal life. When a family relies on tabloid media to make it look good to the public, then the monarchy has lost already. The target, when still living on the plantation behind gilded gates in the UK, earned the tabloids lots of money, so they were more than happy. When the targets decided to stop being the piñata for the media, as being part of the daily distraction fake story to attract or to protect someone or others in the British royal family that day or week or month, etc., it was replaced by abuse and harassment, publicly declared in terms of abuse more than once, in writing and also in front of camera. the business model changed to one of inciting hatred, which also paid well. So everyone who wanted extra income on a regular basis found it lucrative. So the abusive behaviour continued across continents, something all involved are going to live to regret one day. Close brackets. And the family who needed distraction were happy behind the curtains on the plantation. That new game you were all playing has now backfired, and from the little I have seen so far, the media have slowly realised what they have done to themselves. The invisible contract is not going to work out so well in its current state, is it? Now that it is the UK that has cut the final cord and done it in full view of a world audience, there is no going back to those halcyon days of lots of money coming in. The golden goose that you both fed off for the past 6 years has now left and has no reason to return to any part of the UK that any of those two groups, media and royal family, that any of you and anywhere that you reside. The British royal family has no one person who can provide the level of distraction you have all fed on since 2016. The Royal Rota clowns have got rid of their money spinner and are now left with the stock that no one wants to buy, even in a famine. All combined do not attract enough to keep 2/3 of you in work, and the remaining third needs to go back to college and learn how to be a journalist, when you have to do real research before you write your fairy tales. I have stated many times recently, there is absolutely no need to employ the number of people on paper who are employed to write about 7 working royals. Zero need. If there was, there would never have been the need to chase the Sussexes the way you have all done, or treat them like traitors. There was no need for the British royal family to treat them like runaway slaves, simply because they chose to leave abuse and to be free to earn their own money and provide a life for their family that was beholden to come with a begging bowl to either of the top 2 royals for permission to live. 95% of British royal family time has been spent on punishing Harry and Meghan and their children, simply because they recognise the abuse and the firm, but do not see a family. The other 5% of time appears to be spent on self-serving activity, and in most areas there is no value added and there is no outcome, just lots of startups. A well-functioning monarchy does not operate in this self-serving way, and the give and take back type of parental process does not work, and in a functioning business would not be employed. And the treatment of a person of colour, anyone who regards them as deserving of love and respect, like anyone else can expect, has been laid bare to the nation and to international partners and others who may have become partners in the future. The world almost lost Meghan, and for that many of us will never, never forgive. Not only do you owe Meghan telephone-sized numbers of dollars for what she paid out to do royal duties and do it in an exemplary way, and you all continue to make money off Meghan in so many ways, it is embarrassing. And then you have the brass neck to treat her like something less than, when in fact she's worth more than any body part of any of the British royal family. People who know their worth do not need others to validate their existence. They stand true in their power and value. All of you involved in that so-called invisible contract, all you had to do was be civil and respectful, and be glad that all the positive publicity that the monarchy was receiving. But you decided to go a different route, so we are where we are now. Rota clowns, I see this last few days, as this non-story runs for a little while, but it won't go anywhere for all of the above. It was patently obvious that some of you suddenly realised your money tree is about to become extinct, and you know deep down that what you have left to write about won't even put food on the table for a week. Never mind give you a luxury lifestyle in the future. Both sides of that contract have imploded and damaged yourselves. Whilst your support base that you all built up by the incitement of hate model being employed on various platforms will laugh with you for a short while, but you all know the gig is up. And eventually, those on those various platforms, their money will start to reduce too. Karma. And to bring this week's podcast to an end, I'd just like to add a little postscript. You can't evict anyone who has already left. You cannot take away what you do not own. Deep down, you will all wish you acted better than you did. The coronation will require the skills of the rota clowns to make it seem like a huge success. I am sure, according to the UK press, the 3 days will look like it was fabulous. But you all know the true cost of the damage done over the last 6 years. And now you will all start to reap what you have all sowed. It may take years, but the erosion of many structures has already begun. That's it from me for this week. As usual, look forward to you in the comments. And as I said, the article will contain a number of tables and images. Some images will be in the video podcast as well. Hopefully you will find it interesting. And over the coming weeks and month, or maybe when the coronation has happened, you may wish to look up details about the history of that. All of those kind of links are listed at the end of the article. So, it's goodbye from me. Goodbye from Ivy. Bye.